Okay, welcome everyone. We will get started. My name is Nick Olsen. Work for Predict Wind and have done for about 8 years. And I'm super excited to do this webinar today, covering off the wave routing feature. It's I think it's super cool, and it's been quite a lot of development go into it to get to where we've got to with it, and it'll be exciting. It's exciting to just walk through how to set it up and sort of some beginning steps on how you might use it. So what we're going to cover off is we're going to have how you set up your wave polars. There's a few little intricacies there. Then we're going to run a route and have a look at that and just talk about the levels that we do want to see and don't want to see, and some of the different features there and where you can do that analysis. And we'll have a look in the Offshore App as well. So most of the stuff we'll do it in the Predict Wind website, and then we'll have a look in the Offshore App. Also when we go into the Offshore App, I do want to have a quick look at the AIS for when you're offshore, just because we never did a webinar on the AIS feature, and there's been some little tweaks and updates done to that since we launched it a couple of months ago. So let's get started. Before we really get too far into that, I'll just sort of talk about why we did this. It's about 2 years that we've been working on this from start to where we are today, and it's taken a lot of effort. But something we realized was that a lot of people weren't really putting the due diligence that they should be into looking at the sea states when they were doing coastal and offshore passages. The sea state is critical to your safety, and then having a pleasant passage. So yeah, having a feature that would give you more information than what was available already, and then really sort of spell out what it was that you were looking at is sort of what we were aiming to do. Always the ideas are easy and the execution is a lot harder. So a lot of very clever people have worked on this, and so yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm here in the Predict Wind forecast website on my laptop. This is where, at the moment, you have to set up your wave polars. You can't do it elsewhere, so you have to come to forecast.predictwind.com. I'm just in the general forecast here. If I come down here to tools and then weather routing and click on that, and you can see here I am now in my weather routing page on my desktop, and I'm going to come up here to where it says routing preferences. And this is where you would normally set up your polars. So we'll click on that. And so most of the top, we've always had this wave polar button here, and basically people have never used it. So obviously, before we do anything, we need to set up our boat polar. Our boat polar is our performance, the performance polar of our boat. So how fast the software thinks our boat is going to go in any wind condition. Also, when we're doing the routing, we've been always had the ability to take a current, ocean and tidal currents into account, and we've always actually had the ability to have a wave polar, but people never used the wave polar because I'll show you in a minute. The old wave polar was a lot of effort to set up, and then the outputs were not that visible either. So we've solved that. So our boat polar, we can select any kind of boat. So whether we can come in here and select our boat type, whether there's some generic types here. There is all sorts of boats. If your boat's not in here, that's completely fine. It's not a big deal. You could choose a boat that has similar performance to you. Or you could not use the predefined polar, and you could use the sail polar or the advanced polar. And if you have a powerboat, you can use the powerboat polar. And obviously we realized with this feature, sort of once we got into it, how awesome this actually is for powerboats, because you're very more affected than a sailboat at times by the sea state. So the powerboating feature in here, it works very well for you. And how you would set that up is that we have this these sailing terms here for you, which we are going to change this setup. But the front end's easy to change on that, but we just have to do a little bit more work to change the back end and make this easier to set up for powerboaters. But what we want to know here is how fast you're going to go when you're heading into the wind, how fast you're going to go. We're talking about your cruising speeds, right? How fast you're going to go if you were in a cross sea, which nobody really wants, and hopefully we can avoid that. And then when you're going with the wind, how fast you would travel in a following sea. And then, and so all of that is in what we would, this is a generalization as such. It's 15 knots in moderate waves. That's what you do. Then in flat water, how fast would you go? So dead flat calm day, how fast would you go? So that's your powerboat setup. We'll come back to our predefined setup for a yacht, and we will go from here. So I've selected the Juno, and I'm going to run with that one today, and we will then click over here to the wave polar. So this is purely how fast our boat goes with the wind. And you can see over here, I've got my polar table with all the different wind speeds, the wind angles, and how fast it goes. I'm then going to come over here and click on wave polar. And we need to ignore this confusingly worded thing here. If I turn that on, you'll see this is actually the old wave polar. So we turn that off because we don't want this. If we have the old wave polar on here, we don't get the outputs that we want to look at with our roll, vertical acceleration, and slamming incidents. So we have this off. This is going to change. Enable our wave polar. On, off, simple as that. If it's off, there's nothing to see. On, you've got your dimensions here. So I'm on a predefined polar. If I have this little box here ticked, it's going to use the dimensions that we have loaded for that boat. So I know that when you're cruising, or if you had a racing version of a boat, excuse me, I'll just have a sip of my coffee. Your displacement might be different. So you can alter these parameters. So a intricacy of how this is set up, if you are using a power polar, a sail polar, or an advanced polar, you can't have this ticked. You have to untick it, and you have to adjust these numbers here. So we've got our displacement, our waterline length, our beam, and our draft. And so just down here, if you're unsure what any of those terms are or how we expect you to enter them, we can click on this, and you can see here we have the explanation of the terms. So if you're a catamaran, obviously you're a lot wider. You put that in, and the router can then begin to create your hydrodynamic picture that we can use in the routing. So that's all there to see if you want to see it. You can adjust these numbers. Let's say you've got a lot of cruising gear on your boat, you can adjust that number. You might even if it's a guess, it's a best guess. So it's all good. Okay. And also don't get too strung out on this. I mean, if I had a Juno 54 or a Beneteau 50, how they within reason, how they react in certain wave states is going to give me a pretty good picture. And obviously those numbers would be different, but again, we're looking at a tool here So, we're into providing you with lots of tools that you can actually make really good decisions. So you'll see here, we also have our fastest time and our comfort setting. So the wave routing as such it will adjust your polar. So if you're smashing into a sea, it will slow your boat down. If you're running with a sea, it might speed you up a bit. So that influence on the polar is calculated by the automatically calculated by the router. And if we're running for fastest time, then, which is what I like to do, then that's a good, it's not going to avoid any of the conditions. If we want to avoid conditions, we come over here and we click on comfort. But this isn't part of the wave routing as such. This is just our comfort settings. So we can put stuff in here where we would avoid conditions. So where we would avoid combined wave of up of 3.5, 2.5, whatever you want to put in. Don't put them too low because it does cut you all over the ocean to avoid this. I'm going to go fastest time. We might come back and have a look at the comfort just to compare how much it would change the route and how it would affect our other outputs. So we've got our wave polar set up here. It's turned on. We're ready. We've set our boat polar, so we're ready to go. So come over here to weather routing, and I'm just actually, I'll do the weather routing, and then I'm going to go back to departure planning, because the departure planning for this is super awesome. I mean, I think that the wave routing outputs and the departure planning is, really awesome, because you can actually avoid the times that you're going to end up in these nasty conditions. I mean, using it in the weather routing, you're either going to know it's coming or you're going to do something to avoid it. With the departure planning, you can, you've got another tool in your toolbox there to avoid leaving when those conditions are, when you're going to run into nasty conditions. And, we've had this feature in soft release for a while now, and we have had some pretty awesome feedback from people. Some people have even made videos about it as to actually, they've used the wave routing and actually seen the results in real life. And the feedback's been awesome on it. So I've just run my weather route there. I've purposely chosen this route because I know that I'm in New Zealand. I'm in Auckland, New Zealand, and I know that we have some pretty epic weather out here in the Tasman at the moment. It's winter in New Zealand. We get these low pressure systems rolling around the Antarctica, and every now and then they pop up between Australia and New Zealand and come and give us a whack, which is pretty good for some of our team that live in the South Island that want to go skiing today. So we've run our weather route, and which we would normally do, and we can, obviously we know this would be a pretty nasty trip. I can just go through that. I mean, well, this early bit would. I mean, this is windy, right? It's 30 knots average. So, if I went to the gas map, it would be really windy. We probably wouldn't leave at this time. But what I wanted to look at, why I wanted to do that was I just really wanted to have a good look at the outputs. So I've gone over here to tables, and I can scroll down here, and I can see my usual, my usual weather routing stuff that I'm used to seeing. And obviously we can see that wind speed spikes up. That's average wind speed into 30 knots. It's that's very windy, and we, without even using any of the new features, we would know that was not going to be a good time to be out there. But we come down here and we can start to see our outputs. So something that we have changed in the release of this feature is that in your graphs here for wave, you can actually now see all of the different wave states. So you can see the wind wave, primary, secondary, and tertiary swells, which is really the that was sort of the part of the equation that was really missing before, was that we weren't calculating all of the you know, secondary and tertiary wave states. We were doing the combined wind wave and swell, and that was, you know, some feedback that we'd had over many years, was that, you know, people would look at it and it would be a beautiful looking trip. The wind was perfect, the waves looked good, and then they would do this passage, and the whole way they had this you know, a secondary or tertiary swell coming from a different angle that was, you know, just making their trip really uncomfortable, people being seasick, and you know, not enjoying their time out there, and yeah, just making it a very unpleasant trip. And you know, and the other side of this is it can actually make conditions very dangerous on board. So we have our usual stuff here. So here we can see our influence of the waves on the polar. So when we set our polar before, the polar, the performance polar, it was expecting that we were sailing in this dead flat world. And so that was our optimum conditions in dead flat water. So obviously you need to, you know, that's not true in the real world. And so now it's with the wave polar turned on, you can see here, you know, this nasty stuff that we've got early on, that we're it's actually slowed us down. So we're not, you know, obviously in that wave state, our boat just literally cannot go as fast as it would if the water was flatter, or even if it was a you know, a really big period between the waves. You know, it could be a big swell and wouldn't slow us down too much, but you know, we've got the wind wave and the different swells all slowing us down here, and so you can see it slowed us down. And then further on in our journey, obviously it's speeding us up. So we're actually, you know, being pushed by the waves here, and so that's, you know, that's the output that we can see, and give a much more realistic route. I mean, why do we want, you know, people might go, oh well, so what? Why does that matter? Obviously, the more accurate our routes are, the more accurate our routing is, then the difference of where we end up in 2 or 3 days time can be quite significant. So the more accurate we can be with you know, replicating what happens in the real world, then the better weather, you know, the better the weather data is going to serve you. So it is important, and you know, if you, I'm sure that some racing sailors would be pretty excited about that as well. So then we come down here to our roll, and I'm going to go through this again, but you'll see here we start out and it just, you know, it gets real nasty. We would not want to be in this. So as I mentioned, we've had some feedback from various people on this already. Gentleman that made a video on it, he did a passage from Newmere to Australia, and near the end of his passage he had the roll, which is an RMS, it's the root mean square, and in degrees. So it's not actually, you know, 40, you might be like, oh, 4 degrees of roll, that's not much. My boat heels over to 30, 40, but this is, you know, this is the indicator that we have. And so he actually, after doing the passage, he also on the passage, the routing was saying that was going to be anywhere between 4 and 5 from him at the end of his trip. And he thought that'll be okay. You know, we'd sort of, we say that 4 is when things start to get difficult on board. You know, like it's hard to move around, you know, really be on your game. And anyway, he, after his passage, he actually came back and sort of said, actually, I would 3 would be my limit. I thought the 4 was actually really uncomfortable. We weren't happy on board, and it wasn't nice. So, you see here we go up to 6, 7, and sit in this area up and between 4 to 6, and it would be pretty nasty. And then obviously as we move away from that system, it becomes a lot nicer. But we've still got a long time out there. Comes down here, this is we go below 3, and then actually when we get towards the end of our trip, we actually have this this sort of up and down. I mean, obviously the reason the different models are showing this peaking at different times is that we're going to get there at different times. So we would update our route along the trip, and we would be refreshing this information. And so that's the beauty of this, is that if you have an Iridium Go or a similar type satellite connection with you can get this data while you're offshore. You can continually update, and you can change your you can change your course, or slow your boat down if you need to. So, and then we have our vertical acceleration. It's in G's, it's G-force. And again, you'll see here we are above the 0.2 is what we think is more acceptable. But this here, basically, I didn't believe this as someone that's never been seasick in their life, but apparently, according to the modeling guys that did the hydrodynamic modeling for this, you can make anyone seasick, and it's all to do with this vertical acceleration. So if you there's 2 ways to look at this. It's I've sailed with people that have been seasick, and they can be incapacitated. They not much help on board. So obviously, if you see these conditions, it's not something that you want to be part of. You start losing crew members to seasickness, and things can get difficult on board pretty quick. There's also the safety aspect of this. So let's say you don't have a choice about these conditions. Like, for whatever reason, you're halfway across the Atlantic and systems come in, or whatever it is. You've ended up in these conditions, or that they're approaching. You can change the safety protocols on board. And this would be particularly true for racing sailors. When we're racing, we don't get to choose when we leave, and so often you do end up at times in races when there's conditions that you wouldn't choose to be in. But this is when you would change your safety protocols on board. So we know, in 12 hours, we're going to get into this nasty weather and nasty sea state, and we know that it's going to be gnarly on board. And so we might say, okay, from 1600 today, our safety protocol on board is that you don't go on deck without your harness and being clipped on, because we know that the vertical acceleration is going to be, above 0.25 or whatever it is that you decide. And as you use this more, you will come to appreciate it. So still interesting to see that we have this funny bit here at the end, and I'll have a look at that in a second. And the reason I really chose this route was it's actually to get this slamming incidence up. I really wanted to see some nasty conditions. Anything over 50% is really horrible. It is, potentially going to break your boat. So, I'm sure maybe not everyone, but what this is like when the boat starts really slamming over waves and everything on board rattles and shakes. It's not something that any of us want to experience, really. You feel like the keel's going to fall off, or the mast's going to go through the bottom of the boat. This is the stuff we want to avoid, and when I say avoid, you would take action to avoid these these events. So I wanted to have a look at the end of our passage here, where we could see the that spike up in the roll and vertical acceleration just at the end of our passage. And so I thought we'd have a look at the wave direction and see if we could sort of just work out why that's happening. And I realize that we're sitting here in the tables and we're in the graphs and we're not in the map. And to be fair, this is where with all of the tools that the real information is in these tables. We all love the maps and looking at it, and it is good for visual analysis, but the real nitty-gritty is, the detail is here in the tables. So if we look at the combined, or let's look at the wind wave, and so we can see the direction here, between 90 and 1 through 5, and then we look at the primary, and we can see that we've got a different direction. Our waves are our wind wave and our primary swell are different directions, and then the secondary and the tertiary. So I think that's why we're getting this, that result at the end of our trip down here. If I come down and we see this sort of these spikes, I think that's why we're getting it, is that we actually do have that sea state that we're talking about, where the wind wave is obviously being pushed by the wind, but then we have this residual swell coming in from another direction, which is causing the boat to behave in an unexpected way, and we're getting that vertical acceleration there. So this, I'm sure that I don't know that I've been on a boat when you have these conditions and you get this sea state, and the just the way that the boat moves and lifts, it's not very pleasant. So we've got all of this. We can look at this in the summary. We can come down here and see how much time we're going to be in these conditions. I guess this, that's great. I would, for an overview, but we'll probably look a bit more at this. We'll just flick over to departure planning in a second. So if you're not a graph person, if you're a big table person, you can click on the wave tab here and have a look at the different models and how the conditions of how they look in the different models. But the nice thing here is that we can compare all of these waves, the combined, the wind wave, the primary, secondary, tertiary. We can compare them, and you see here we've got these 0 values, and that's because there's nothing, they're not there in the model. That's not, we don't have that. There's actually, they don't exist, so they're not there. So it's good to know. And you can come down here and you can see we actually do have, the different wave states. So that's, and we get the roll as well. So, I imagine this would be pretty uncomfortable because we do have the different wave states, different directions. So there's plenty going on there. So, and you can see that in our roll, our 5.3, it would be horrible. So keep everybody on board happy, and and don't get yourself into these situations. So I'm going to come over here to the departure planning, because I think that this is an epic way to help you decide on your times to depart. I'm not putting any great analysis in when I'm leaving here. I'm just running it now, and then we'll look at the route, the results. So all of my all the stuff that I set up earlier, I'll just have a sip of my coffee. It's probably cold coffee. So we have, if I clicked on that planning preferences button there, it would be the same as the weather routing preferences we looked at before. We can change our wave polar and our boat polar in the planning preferences, just the same as we would in weather routing. So the sort of the key thing that we want to look at here is, when we're doing passages, we shouldn't sail to schedules. I know people, for whatever reason, your visa's running out or whatever, people do tend to leave when perhaps they shouldn't, and end up in conditions that can go bad quickly. So we have this departure planning tool, and it is just a tool, but it is fantastic for looking at the different departure times and seeing when might be a better time to depart. As we've discussed already, like leaving right now might not be a good idea, but the reality is once that system goes through, I would be considering it, because as you can see, that breeze comes around behind us, and on those different departure times, and it starts to look pretty good. As always with the departure planning, great to look at the maps, but the real detail is in the tables. So we will go in there. If you want to know more about departure planning, we do have tutorials on it. It is an awesome feature, and I think it's got way better with this new data. So we can see here we've run our departure plan. So you can see the time here in New Zealand, it's 8:33 in the morning, and we've got our different passages. So I've got the departure times 1 day apart, so 24 hours apart, and so I've got all these different times that I could depart over the next 4 days. I have my usual information in here about my wind speeds, maximum wind speed, average, so 32 knot average if I left today. But then, as we just saw in the map, it does start to look pretty good if we left in on day 3 or 4. See here the gusts, she's pretty fresh. 44 knots in a model is pretty up there. We're in New Zealand, so we're fairly low in the world, and so any Cape values that we see down here, convective available potential energy, any Cape values that we see down here are definitely up to this 0.2 level, worth noting. And we've got rain, so we've got the Cape and the rain. So yeah, as we can, it's a bit of a no-brainer on that one. We wouldn't want to be there. We'll come down here and we've got our reaching and downwind, and in these later days it looks better. Even here on this day 2, it's not too bad, and we'd get that nice strong breeze as we left. Anyway, we come down here. We just need to remind myself this isn't a departure planning webinar. We can see the time that we spend in these different combined wind wave states, and then we come down here further and we see our new features, our wave routing features, and then we can see the time that we would spend if we left at any of these times in what we call the more difficult conditions. So you can see here, if we left today, 39% of our route, we would have higher than 4 degrees RMS roll. So, and we say here, movement around the boat is difficult and unsafe. So no go. I just said, I looked at day 2, I'll get that decent breeze out of the port. But again, 30% of our route, so it's probably that, at least that first part, we would be in these nasty conditions. And then even if I look at excuse me, day, departure 3 and departure 4, I still have a period of time. And so what I would do is and which we may or may not be acceptable to us. We can go and then run the weather routing, starting at these times, and analyze where is it in the passage that we would be getting these sea states. I suspect that might be at the end. That's a long way away if it's at the end of the passage. So we might actually just go, and we might either, you know, slow down once we're closer to our destination to avoid those conditions, or you know, or just say, oh, it's not going to be that long, we'll deal with it. Again here, time with the vertical acceleration above 0.2 g, 30%, and then these other departures, you know, none of the time. So maybe we can live with the roll if once we run our weather out and decide it's not too bad. Vertical slamming, yeah, 1% of the time. As I say, the slamming is nasty. We don't want it at all. And then the influence on our polars. I mean, you can see on this 4th day that it actually doesn't, the wave state's not slowing us down or speeding us up at all. On the 3rd departure day, it is affecting us a bit. And obviously our early one, it makes a big difference. So, you know, sometimes when you look at departure planning, it can be not that clear. You know, there's certain times when you just look at it and it's not that clear whether you would, you know, what's the difference between the days? Not a lot, you know, but then you might come down here and go, actually, one of them, I'm going to end up in this horrible sea state. And this is just the beginning of our planning. We would then go back to where we've just been in our weather routing, and we would run our weather route. I mean, I would run it for this day 3. So the 27th, I'd go back to my weather routing, and I would change my start time to the 27th, and I would calculate that route, and we would get those results. So we'll have a quick look at that, and then we're going to jump over to the Offshore App. I'll just close that there. So everything that we have done in here, other than setting up our polars, but all this, you know, all of this information that we're looking at, all the outputs, you know, so we can do the departure planning and the weather routing. It's all in the Offshore App. So we'll just wait for this route to calculate. You know, obviously it is crunching a massive amount of data to do this. Apparently it's billions of calculations are going on to run our weather route. So we'll let that finish, and then we'll just have a quick look at the, so this is, you know, let's assume we were looking at that day 3 departure. We come over here to tables, and let's just quickly go to our summary and come down here and have a look at the time that we spend. You know, so there we can see we've still got the roll across all the models. We can see that we saw in the departure planning. But yeah, it's definitely looking like a better time to leave. Let's go to our graph, come down here and see where the roll is. And so it's not the beginning of our journey, it's the end of our journey where we're getting that roll. I mean, we are, you know, under the, you know, we do go above it here, we do go above 4. So we might want to analyze that further as to what's going on there. And you can see here we do get that vertical acceleration towards the end. So I could come in here and I could look at the wave and see what's going on. Yes, yeah, I think so. Excuse me. So you can see here that there's obviously the remnants of a system out here, and it's pushing in some pretty big wave state, and so that must be affecting, you know, that's going to have a swell running through. If I go back to the wind, just trying to move you can see that that swell's running this way and the wind's coming in this way. So that could be what it is, and there could be there's other primary and secondary and tertiary swells there as well. I'm just going to stop sharing this screen, and I am going to share my Offshore app, and we're going to just have a quick look at AIS data. If I can find the buttons to push. Okay, so here we are in the PredictWind Offshore app on my Mac, and I have run a weather route. And you know, I've sailed out here, and I've run my weather route, and I'm, you know, I've got all my information that we had before that we were looking at. You know, we've got all our wave data's in here, the same as what we just looked at. I can do all of that in the Offshore app, and so that's awesome. I don't need to do anything special with my download. I just you know, do the download. It's in my weather routing, and away I go. But what I wanted to look at here is we recently added AIS to PredictWind. And we've been working on that since we released it. You know, now you can see way more boats than what you did before. We've improved our data source. We've improved the way that it displays on the maps, and we've also changed how it works in here, which is how it was always intended, and has made me very happy that you can now see it in here. So I've done my download, and I went, and I'll show you again in a second just how we do that. And I downloaded the AIS data, and then I can come in here to this, where it's the same place where I would change my models. So, you know, I went over to the ECMWF or the Spire or UKMO, and I can turn on AIS. And so then all of a sudden I'm underway, I'm on my passage, and I can see that I'm about to sail into an area where there is boats fishing. So you can see up here, these are fishing fleets, and yeah, I suspect these guys are fishing as well. And we know that they have all sorts of gear out in the water, and there's certain places in the world where there's a massive issue. Yeah, this guy is fishing. So the cool thing about this is I can download this data when I'm offshore over an Iridium Go connection. I can get this data. It's not too big, and it is a critical thing that we can see. So I've seen this now, and so I go, okay, well, what would I do? And there's lots of things we can do. We can just be aware that these guys are here. We can, you know, when we get to this part of our passage, we can, you know, just know that that's where they're going to, you know, that's where they're going to be, and we'll be aware, and we'll avoid it. But the other thing we could do is I can come up here and I can click on this button up here on the top right, and I can click on a boundary button, and I can do this. Oopsie, I clicked on a fisherman. Am I on? Here we go. I could create a boundary around these guys. Oh, I need to stop clicking on fisherman. And go, okay, I don't want to go through here. And then I come over here and I go, oh, hang on, I will stop. Come over here and I can click on next. Oh, hang on, I'll just cancel that. Cancel that, click on there. So then I've set my boundary. So I've set my boundary, and I come over here and I click on download, and then I've got all my parameters set up. I mean, obviously I'd change all of this. I'm not going to download them though. Come over here to next. You can see I've got my AIS data on. So that's going to be downloaded again. Not that I need to, because I've just downloaded it before. come over here and click on next. But what I would do here is I've already got all that data. I've already spent the time to download it. And so I'm just actually going to download a new weather route now that I've put my boundary in, and I can, it's going to route me around that area. I mean, you may or may not want to do it that way, but it's definitely a way that you can do it. And again, we're crunching all that data. This has sent that request off to the Predict Wind servers, and we are crunching all of the, all the wave data, all the highest resolution grids, the 9K ECMWF, the UKMO, the Spire, Predict Wind models. It's using the highest resolution it can to calculate that weather route. And as we know, when we're offshore, we use the lower resolution grids to just visualize what we're getting there. So it should finish calculating this in a second, and then we will have our new route, which is going to take us around where these guys are fishing. So I can close that. And, yep, as you can see, we've got our new route with all of our data. Click over to the map, and you'll see here that my weather routing is now taking me around this area here. Or if I wanted to avoid these guys, again, I could set a boundary around them. So just wanted to cover off the AIS data and how that how we can use that to help us. Obviously, there's other parts in the world where we would use this, where we can see shipping lanes and when we're approaching those. So just another tool that you can use to see where things are. So I think that's about it for me, for what I wanted to cover off today. Awesome. Oh, thank you, everybody. And yeah, see you on the next webinar.